Welcome, restless souls, to Carmen's Crypt. I'm Carmen Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carmen's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes alive. This is Carmen's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. Samantha Williams stood in her kitchen, coffee growing cold in her trembling hands, staring at the empty spot on top of the refrigerator where Jingle should have been. The family's elf on the shelf had been sitting there last night, positioned to watch over the cookie jar. A strategic placement to discourage after-dinner snacking. But now, in the gray light of December morning, the spot was empty. "Tom?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did you move Jingle this morning?" Her husband's voice drifted down from upstairs, thick with sleep. "What? No, I thought it was your turn." Samantha set down her coffee and began methodically searching the kitchen. This wasn't the first time she'd forgotten moving the elf, though she could have sworn she remembered placing him on the refrigerator last night. Gemma, their 8-year-old daughter, had been asking increasingly difficult questions about how Jingle moved, and Samantha had been extra careful lately to remember each placement. The sound of small feet thundering down the stairs made her stomach clench. Gemma burst into the kitchen in her unicorn pajamas, hair wild from sleep. "Where's Jingle today?" she asked, eyes already scanning the room. "I'm sure he's around here somewhere, sweetie," Samantha said, forcing a smile. "Why don't you help me look?" They searched the entire first floor together, but found nothing. Tom joined them, still in his robe, and they expanded the search upstairs. As the minutes ticked by, Samantha felt a growing sense of dread. She remembered the way Gemma had cried last year when they'd had to explain that the tooth fairy couldn't come because Daddy had forgotten to go to the ATM. This would be worse. "Maybe he got stuck somewhere on his way back from the North Pole," Gemma suggested, peering under her bed. Her voice wavered slightly, but Samantha could tell she was trying to be brave. Tom caught Samantha's eye and mouthed, "Amazon?" She nodded gratefully. "Hey, Princess," Tom said. "We need to get ready for school. I'm sure Jingle will turn up later." But Gemma wouldn't budge. "We have to find him. He's never been missing before." Her lower lip trembled. What if something bad happened to him? Samantha knelt beside her daughter. "Honey, Jingle is—" She began, but stopped when she saw Tom shaking his head frantically behind Gemma's back. They had agreed never to break the magic, not until Gemma figured it out on her own. The rest of the morning was tense. Gemma barely touched her breakfast, and Samantha had to rush her through getting dressed for school. As she watched her daughter trudge up the path to the school entrance, shoulders slumped, Samantha pulled out her phone and ordered a replacement elf. Thank God for same-day delivery. When she got home, she did one final thorough search. She was on her hands and knees, checking under the couch for the third time, when she noticed something odd. There was a small tear in the fabric covering the bottom of the couch, and what looked like claw marks in the wood behind it. Samantha ran her fingers over the grooves. They felt fresh. The doorbell rang, making her jump. She opened the door to find a package on the step, but no delivery person in sight. The Amazon van was already turning the corner at the end of the street. Inside the box was the new elf, nearly identical to Jingle. Samantha positioned him carefully on the bookshelf in the living room. angled so he would be the first thing Gemma saw when she came home. She snapped a picture and sent it to Tom. Crisis averted. But as she turned to leave the room, something made her look back. For a moment, just a moment, she could have sworn the elf's head had turned slightly to follow her movement. Samantha blinked hard and looked again. The doll sat perfectly still, its painted smile unchanged. That afternoon, Gemma came home from school and ran straight to the living room. Samantha held her breath, waiting for the reaction. "Mom?" Gemma called out. "Mom, come quick." Samantha hurried in, expecting either joy or tears. Instead, she found her daughter standing very still, staring at the elf with her head tilted to one side. "That's not Jingle," Gemma said flatly. "Of course it is, sweetie. He just got stuck somewhere this morning, but he made it back." Gemma shook her head slowly. "No. Jingle had a chip in his hat from when I accidentally touched him last year, and his eyes were different. This isn't him." Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't noticed any chip in Jingle's hat, but Gemma had always been more observant than her. She looked more closely at the new elf. In the late afternoon light, its eyes did look different somehow. Darker, more glassy. "Gemma, sometimes elves can look a little different depending on the light. Or you're lying." Gemma's voice was quiet but firm. "Something happened to Jingle, and now there's a wrong elf in our house." The doorbell rang, making them both jump. Mrs. Peterson needed to borrow sugar. When they returned to the living room, 2 minutes later, the bookshelf where Samantha had placed the elf was empty. Before she could process this, there was a crash from the kitchen. They both ran to investigate and found the cookie jar shattered on the floor. Cookies scattered everywhere. A gust of wind rustled the curtains, but all the windows were closed. "How did—" Samantha started. "He did it," Gemma whispered, pointing behind them. Samantha turned. Through the doorway, she could see the bookshelf where she'd placed the new elf. It was empty. Tom came home to find them both sitting at the kitchen table, the mess from the cookie jar still on the floor. Samantha tried to explain about the replacement elf, the crash, the empty shelf, but it all sounded absurd in the telling. Tom checked the bookshelf himself, then methodically searched the room. "There," he said finally, pointing to the top of the china cabinet. The elf sat perched on the edge, its legs dangling over the side. "See, it just fell and we didn't notice moving it." "But Tom, I didn't." "Samantha." He cut her off with a meaningful look at Gemma. "It's fine. Everything's fine." That night, after Gemma was finally asleep, Samantha and Tom sat on the couch with a bottle of wine between them. "I know what I saw, Tom. That elf moved." "You've been stressed about Christmas," he said gently. "The shopping, the planning, Gemma asking questions. It's natural to get a little confused." Samantha took another sip of wine. "Did you see the marks under the couch?" "Probably from the dog." "We don't have a dog, Tom. We had to give Max away last year because of Gemma's allergies." Tom was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I'm going to bed. Don't forget to move the elf." But Samantha couldn't bring herself to touch it. She sat in the darkness for a long time, watching the china cabinet. Just before she finally went up to bed, she could have sworn she heard a soft scratching sound from above, and a quiet, high-pitched giggle. She didn't sleep much at all that night, and in the morning, the elf was somewhere new. Samantha woke to the sound of breaking glass. The bedside clock read 3:33 a.m., its red digits casting a bloody glow across the room. Tom stirred beside her, but didn't wake. She slipped out of bed, grabbed her phone for light, and crept downstairs. The trail of destruction led to Gemma's craft room. Glitter covered the floor like fresh snow, and in the center stood the elf, surrounded by shredded construction paper. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. She had definitely left it in the kitchen before bed. "Tom?" she called out softly, praying this was just her husband playing an ill-conceived prank. No answer. She raised her phone to take a picture, proof for Tom that something wasn't right. But when she checked the image, the elf was facing a different direction than it had been a moment ago. She looked up sharply. In the dim light of her phone, the elf's shadows seemed to twist and stretch across the wall. Samantha backed out of the room slowly, closed the door, and ran upstairs to wake Tom. "It's moving!" she hissed, shaking him awake. "Tom, it's actually moving!" He followed her downstairs, grumbling about overactive imaginations. But when they reached the craft room, the elf was gone. Only the mess remained as evidence that Samantha hadn't imagined it all. "You must have left the window open," Tom said, pointing to the curtains rustling in a non-existent breeze. "The wind probably knocked things over." "The windows are sealed for winter," Samantha replied. "You did it yourself last weekend." Before Tom could respond, Gemma's scream pierced the pre-dawn darkness. They found her standing in her doorway, pointing at her dresser. The elf sat there, surrounded by Gemma's hair bows, now shredded into tiny pieces. But worse than the destruction was the way the bows had been arranged. They formed perfect little nooses, each one hanging from the dresser handles. "I told you it was wrong," Gemma whispered. "I told you it wasn't Jingle." Tom finally seemed to be taking things seriously. He grabbed the elf, ignoring Gemma's warning cry about touching it, and locked it in the safe in his home office. "There," he said. "Problem solved. Now let's all try to get some sleep before—" A scratching sound came from inside the safe. They spent the rest of the night huddled in the master bedroom, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. When morning finally came, Tom went to check the safe. It was still locked, but empty. They found the elf in the kitchen, perched on the coffee maker. "We have to get rid of it," Samantha said. Tom shook his head. "Think about this rationally. It's a doll, a toy. There has to be an explanation." "Daddy," Gemma said, her voice small. "Look at its hands." The elf's cloth hands were stained red. At first, Samantha thought it was paint from Gemma's craft supplies. Then she saw the small red footprints leading to the garbage can. Inside, they found the remains of a cardinal that had been nesting in their Christmas wreath. That was when Tom finally started to believe. He took the elf to work with him, planning to dispose of it far from the house. Samantha spent the day cleaning up the various messes, trying to restore some normalcy. Gemma stayed home from school, refusing to leave Samantha's side. Around noon, Samantha's phone chimed with a text from Tom. "Did you take the elf from my car?" Her hands shook as she replied, "No, why?" "It's gone, but I found this on my seat." The photo he sent showed a crude drawing in red crayon. 3 stick figures, 2 tall, 1 small, lying under what looked like a Christmas tree, and all 3 had X's for eyes. Samantha was about to respond when she heard Gemma gasp. The elf sat on their Christmas tree's highest branch, nearly touching the angel. Its head was turned completely backward, facing them with that painted-on smile. Things escalated quickly after that. They found it in sealed Tupperware containers, inside the locked car in their garage, even in Gemma's dollhouse after they had boarded up its tiny windows with tape. Each time it appeared somewhere new, something would be destroyed. Christmas ornaments, family photos, Gemma's toys. Tom set up security cameras, but they only caught strange shadows and occasional bursts of static. In one frame, around midnight, they saw something small darting across the kitchen floor, trailing what looked like black smoke. The worst was the singing. They would wake in the middle of the night to hear "Santa Claus is Coming to Town" being hummed in a high childlike voice, always from a different part of the house. The lyrics seemed changed somehow, darker, though they could never quite make out the new words. Samantha started researching possessed objects online, while Tom called every priest in the phone book. Most hung up on him. One agreed to come look, but the moment he stepped into the house, the elf appeared on his shoulder. The priest left without his caller and refused to return their calls. Gemma, surprisingly, seemed to be coping better than her parents. "It wants us to be scared," she explained matter-of-factly. "It's like the bullies at school. They only have power if you let them see you're afraid." But even Gemma's courage wavered the night they found all her stuffed animals arranged in a circle in the basement, their button eyes removed and placed in the center like some bizarre offering. The elf sat in the middle of the eye pile, and though its painted face hadn't changed, Samantha could have sworn it looked smug. "Why is it doing this?" Tom demanded, after they'd calmed Gemma down enough to sleep. "What does it want?" As if in answer, they heard a sound from the kitchen, the scratch of crayon on paper. They crept downstairs to find a new drawing on the refrigerator. It showed their house with Christmas lights, but the lights were dripping something dark. Below, in childish scrawl, were the words, "12 days till Christmas, 12 days till forever. Your house is my house. We'll all play together." Samantha reached for the drawing, but before she could touch it, it burst into flames. The fire died as quickly as it had appeared, leaving no trace of the paper or even scorch marks on the refrigerator. When they turned around, the elf was gone again, but this time it had left the front door wide open, letting in the December night, and in the fresh snow on their front lawn, tiny footprints led out into the darkness, then abruptly turned back toward the house. The Williams family hadn't slept in days. Dark circles hung under their eyes as they huddled in Gemma's room, which had become their refuge after they discovered the elf couldn't or wouldn't cross the line of salt Gemma had poured across the doorway. None of them questioned why an 8-year-old had thought to do that. "I found something," Samantha said, turning her laptop to face Tom. She had been researching obsessively since the incident with the burning drawing. "Look at this." The webpage showed a scanned article from 1956. "Christmas tragedy strikes local family." Tom read aloud. "The Richardson family was found dead in their home on Christmas morning. Police suspect carbon monoxide poisoning, though the source remains unknown. Peculiarly, all Christmas decorations in the home were destroyed, except for a single antique toy elf." "There's more," Samantha said, scrolling through her notes. 1982, the Henderson family in Ohio. 1999, the Patels in Toronto. 2013, the Bakers in Seattle. All found dead on Christmas morning. All had a mysterious elf decoration that wasn't there before December. "But our elf came from the store," Tom protested weakly. "I still have the Amazon receipt." Gemma, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "No, Daddy. That's just what it wants you to think. It can look like whatever it needs to." She was drawing something in her sketchbook, her crayon moving in fierce, dark strokes. Samantha leaned over to look at the drawing. It showed a dark figure, twisted and spindly, wearing a crude approximation of their elf's red costume, but its face was wrong. Too many eyes, too many teeth. "Gemma, honey," Samantha started, but her daughter cut her off. "I saw it last night when it thought everyone was sleeping. It doesn't always look like a doll." Tom grabbed the sketchbook. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because it told me not to. It said if I did, it would—" Gemma trailed off, looking at the ceiling. A soft thump came from above, followed by the sound of something being dragged. "It's in the attic," Gemma whispered. Tom had blocked the attic access after they had started hearing movement up there, but somehow the elf kept getting in. They had found strange arrangements of their Christmas decorations scattered through the storage boxes, ornaments broken and reassembled into bizarre shapes, strings of lights tied into complex knots that seemed to shift when no one was looking. Samantha pulled Gemma close. "What else did you see, sweetie?" "It's old," Gemma said. "Really old. Before Christmas was Christmas. It used to have a different name, but I can't say it. It doesn't like houses without children. It doesn't like houses that don't believe in magic." She looked up at her parents with eyes that seemed far too ancient for her face. "It used to be invited in a long time ago, but then people forgot about it, and it got angry. Now it pretends to be things people trust. It waits until they let it in, and then—" Another thump from above, louder this time. Dust filtered down from the ceiling. Tom stood up. "We're leaving, now. We'll go to a hotel." "We can't," Gemma said. "It's too late. We invited it in. The house is its house now." As if in response, all the Christmas lights in the house blazed to life at once, despite being unplugged. Through the window, they could see the outdoor decorations lighting up too, bright enough to hurt their eyes. In the driveway, their car's headlights began flashing in rhythm with Silent Night, playing faintly from somewhere in the walls. Samantha's laptop screen flickered, then displayed a single sentence. "Found it." She clicked the link that had appeared. The page showed a medieval woodcut of a creature that looked almost like their elf, but stretched and distorted, surrounded by small figures that might have been children. The text was in Latin, but as Samantha watched, it translated itself before her eyes. The gift bearer, called Krampus by some, takes many forms to enter homes during the winter solstice. It feeds on belief and innocence, corrupting the very magic that sustains it. Once invited, it cannot be banished except through sacrifice of that which it desires most. The laptop slammed shut on its own. From the attic came a new sound. Unwrapping paper, dozens of presents being opened at once. Then something started coming down the stairs. The steps creaked one by one, slow and deliberate. "The real Jingle," Gemma said suddenly. "We never found him." Samantha's eyes widened. "Tom?" The chair under the couch. He was already moving, dropping to his knees by the couch in Gemma's room. The fabric underneath had been slashed open further, creating a small cave of springs and stuffing. Tom reached inside and pulled out their original elf on the shelf, dusty but intact. But something was different about Jingle now. The fabric seemed to shimmer, and the usually painted-on features looked more real, more alive. As they watched, its head turned slowly toward Gemma. "Oh," Gemma said softly, "I understand now." Before her parents could stop her, she walked to the doorway and broke the salt line with her foot. The thing that had been pretending to be their replacement elf stood in the hallway. It was still vaguely elf-shaped, but taller now, its costume darker, its limbs too long and jointed in too many places. Its face was a mess of shadows, except for that eternal painted smile, now stretched wide enough to show rows of needle-sharp teeth. Gemma held up the original jingle like a shield. "You forgot something," she said to the creature. "When you steal someone's shape, you steal their purpose too. And Jingle's purpose was to protect children." The thing in the hallway tilted its head at an impossible angle. Its smile flickered. "You wanted us to believe in magic?" Gemma continued. "Fine. I believe. I believe in all of it. In Santa, in elves, and monsters under the bed." She stepped forward. "But most of all, I believe in this." The original jingle began to glow with a soft golden light. The creature shrieked, a sound like sleigh bells being crushed, and reached for Gemma with hands that had become long, dark claws. But it was too late. The light from Jingle burst outward like a miniature sun, filling the hallway with the smell of peppermint and pine needles. When it faded, the creature was gone. In its place was a small pile of ash, and in the ash, a single silver bell. Gemma picked up the bell and handed it to her mother. "Don't ring it," she warned. "Ever." They looked at Jingle, still glowing faintly in Gemma's hands. Its painted face had returned to normal, but somehow its smile seemed different now, more like a secret shared between friends. "Sometimes," Gemma replied, placing Jingle gently on her bookshelf. "You have to believe in the right kind of magic to fight the wrong kind." Outside, snow began to fall, covering the creature's footprints in the yard. The house creaked and settled, but now it sounded like home again. Christmas lights twinkled harmlessly through the window. But if you looked very carefully at Jingle's eyes, you might see them twinkle too, just keeping watch, just in case the wrong kind of magic ever tried to come back. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carmen's crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed. And remember, in Carmen's crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.